What is called thinking? By Martin Heidegger. Quotes, What is called thinking? By Martin Heidegger is a profound inquiry into the nature of thought itself, challenging readers to consider what it truly means to think. Delivered as a series of lectures in the early 1950s, Heidegger emphasizes that thinking is not merely a technical skill or an accumulation of knowledge, but a fundamental engagement with being. Through a dialogue with past philosophers, particularly Nietzsche, Heidegger reveals thinking as an act of openness to the essential questions that being presents to us. He critiques the modern scientific and technological mindset that reduces thought to calculation or opinion, suggesting instead that genuine thinking requires a reflective and patient approach. This work invites readers to explore thought as a path to understanding existence and encourages a return to an authentic way of engaging with reality, where questions hold as much value as answers. Quote 1. We come to know what it means to think when we ourselves try to think. If the attempt is to be successful, we must be ready to learn thinking. This quote emphasizes the active process of thinking and the need to approach it as a skill that requires learning. It suggests that genuine thinking is not a natural or inherent ability, but something that must be cultivated through effort and openness to learning. Quote 2. Most thought-provoking is that we are still not thinking, not even yet, although the state of the world is becoming constantly more thought-provoking. This statement points to a paradox where, despite the increasingly complex and demanding nature of the world, people are not truly engaging in deep reflective thought. It implies that genuine thinking is rare and often overshadowed by the distractions of modern life. Quote 3. Memory is the gathering of thought. Thought of what? Thought of what holds us, in that we give it thought precisely, because it remains what must be thought about. Here, Heidegger connects memory with thought, suggesting that memory is not merely a recollection of the past, but a way of holding on to what deserves our contemplation. It implies that true thinking involves a continuous engagement with ideas that deeply resonate with our being. Quote 4. What is essential in a friend, for example, is what we call friendly. In the same sense, we now call thought-provoking what in itself is to be thought about. This quote highlights that thought-provoking matters have an inherent quality that calls for contemplation. Just as a friend's essence is friendly, what is genuinely thought-provoking possesses an intrinsic quality that compels us to think deeply. Quote 5. Most thought-provoking in our thought-provoking time is that we are still not thinking. This is a critical assertion about the state of thinking in contemporary times. Heidegger is pointing out the irony that while our era is full of stimuli and matters that require deep reflection, true thinking has not yet occurred. It suggests a need to examine why this failure to think persists, despite the apparent need for it. Quote 6. Science does not think. This is a shocking statement. Let the statement be shocking, even though we immediately add the supplementary statement that nonetheless science always and in its own fashion has to do with thinking. Heidegger challenges the assumption that science is synonymous with thinking. While science involves methods and processes related to thought, it does not engage in the kind of reflective thinking that philosophy seeks. This distinction reveals the limitations of scientific thinking in addressing more profound existential questions. Quote 7. We can learn thinking only if we radically unlearn what thinking has been traditionally. To do that, we must at the same time come to know it. This emphasizes the necessity of a fundamental shift in how we approach thinking. To genuinely learn to think, we must first let go of preconceived notions and traditional understandings of thinking, allowing ourselves to explore what true thinking might entail. Quote 8. Whatever withdraws refuses arrival. But withdrawing is not nothing. Withdrawal is an event. Heidegger discusses the concept of withdrawal, suggesting that the things that withdraw from our immediate perception or understanding still hold significant influence. The act of withdrawing creates a space for thought and invites us to engage with what is absent or elusive. Quote 9. We are who we are by pointing in that direction, not like an incidental adjunct, but as follows. This drawing toward is in itself an essential and therefore constant pointing toward what withdraws. This quote explores the idea that humans are fundamentally oriented toward what withdraws or escapes direct understanding. Our nature involves a constant pointing toward what is beyond our immediate grasp, indicating that true thinking involves this ongoing engagement with the mysterious and the unknown. Quote 10. Mythos and logos become separated and opposed only at the point where neither mythos nor logos can keep to its original nature. Heidegger suggests that the division between myth and reason, logos, occurred when both lost touch with their original essence. He argues that in ancient times, mythos and logos were intertwined, and their current separation reflects a departure from an authentic mode of thinking. Quote 11. Memory is the gathering and convergence of thought upon what everywhere demands to be thought about first of all. Heidegger describes memory not just as a recollection of the past, but as an active gathering of thought. This memory holds and conceals what must be thought of foremost. It is the starting point for profound reflection, suggesting that true thinking involves focusing on what intrinsically calls for contemplation. Quote 12. The leap alone takes us into the neighborhood where thinking resides. This quote implies that thinking is not a gradual process, but rather requires a sudden, almost disorienting shift. To truly think, one must leave behind the familiar, making a metaphorical leap into an entirely new realm of thought, one that is fundamentally different from the steady, linear progress of daily thinking. Quote 13. Teaching is more difficult than learning because what teaching calls for is this: to let learn. Heidegger emphasizes that true teaching is not about imparting information, but about creating the space for learning to occur. A real teacher must step back and allow students to engage with the material themselves, fostering an environment where learners can explore and discover. Quote 14. Only a being who can speak, that is, think, can have hands, and can be handy in achieving works of handicraft. This statement ties the essence of being human to the ability to think and speak. Heidegger suggests that the use of hands in creating and shaping the world is linked to our capacity for thought. The human hand's ability to create, gesture, and communicate symbolizes the depth of our thinking nature. Quote 15. Thinking itself is man's simplest, and for that reason hardest, handiwork, if it would be accomplished at its proper time. Heidegger contends that thinking, though seemingly simple, is the hardest work for humans. It requires timing and effort, as it involves responding to what truly calls for thought. This underscores the idea that genuine thinking is a deliberate, demanding process. Quote 16. Most thought-provoking for our thought-provoking time is that we are still not thinking. He repeats the critical idea that, despite living in an era filled with matters that demand reflection, genuine thinking has not yet occurred. This calls attention to a failure in society's approach to thought, suggesting that people often overlook the profound in favor of the superficial. Quote 17. The reason is that this most thought-provoking thing turns away from us, in fact, has long since turned away from man. Heidegger suggests that the true object of thought has withdrawn from human engagement. This withdrawal creates a distance, making it challenging for humans to think in the way that is required. It also implies that our inability to think is not entirely our fault, but is due to the nature of what demands thought. Quote 18. We are a sign that is not read. This quote implies that human existence itself is like a sign waiting to be interpreted. However, this sign remains unread because people are not truly engaging with the depth of their own existence or the mysteries around them. It points to a profound disconnect between our being and our understanding. Quote 19. Thinking has entered into literature, and literature has decided the fate of Western science. Heidegger links thinking, literature, and science, suggesting that once thinking became entangled in literary forms, it shaped the course of scientific development. He implies that Western science, emerging from philosophy, has lost its direct connection to deep thinking, making it reliant on thinking to reconnect with its source. Quote 20. The teacher is ahead of his apprentices in this alone, that he has still far more to learn than they. He has to learn to let them learn. Heidegger emphasizes that a teacher's true challenge is not in knowing more, but in facilitating the learning process. A good teacher must recognize the importance of letting students discover for themselves, embodying a mindset of continual learning and humility. Quote 21. Beauty is a fateful gift of the essence of truth, and here truth means the disclosure of what keeps itself concealed. Heidegger presents beauty as an inherent aspect of truth, where truth is seen as the revelation of what is hidden. In this sense, beauty is not merely about pleasure, but is connected to the deeper process of uncovering the concealed nature of reality. It emphasizes that true beauty arises when something essential is brought into the light. Quote 22. Who has most deeply thought, loves what is most alive. This line, borrowed from Hölderlin, connects profound thinking with a deep love for life. It suggests that the act of thinking is not a cold, detached process, but rather one that involves a passionate engagement with existence. Those who have delved into the depths of thought develop an appreciation and love for the vitality and vibrancy of life. Quote 23. The question, what is called thinking, can never be answered by proposing a definition of the concept thinking, and then diligently explaining what is contained in that definition. Heidegger argues that the nature of thinking cannot be grasped through mere definitions or conceptual analysis. Thinking is a more dynamic, lived process that resists being fully captured in a fixed explanation. To understand what thinking truly is, one must engage in the act of thinking itself, rather than dissecting it in abstract terms. Quote 24. Modern technology is not constituted by, and does not consist in, the installation of electric motors and turbines and similar machinery. That sort of thing can, on the contrary, be erected only to the extent to which the essence of modern technology has already assumed dominion. Here, Heidegger points out that technology is not simply about machines and devices. It is a manifestation of a deeper essence. The existence of modern machinery reflects the underlying essence of technology, which has taken hold long before the physical aspects appeared. This suggests that understanding technology requires looking beyond its material components to its fundamental nature. Quote 25. Some of us may recall the statement of the first lecture that so far man has acted too much and thought too little. Heidegger reiterates the idea that human activity has become overemphasized at the expense of genuine thinking. This imbalance has led to a world where action dominates, but thought lags behind, unable to keep up with the rapid changes and demands of modern life. The statement underscores the need for a return to deeper contemplation. Quote 26. This withdrawal is what properly gives food for thought, what is most thought-provoking. Heidegger suggests that what truly compels thought is not what is immediately present, but rather what withdraws and remains elusive. This withdrawal draws our attention and creates a space for contemplation, making it the most thought-provoking aspect of our experience. It implies that thinking involves engaging with the hidden, the absent, and the enigmatic. Quote 27. We must, for our part, get underway to learn thinking. This quote emphasizes that learning to think is a journey and a process that requires effort and commitment. It is not an automatic or natural ability, but something that must be cultivated through conscious practice. The phrase encourages an active pursuit of thinking as a craft that one must develop over time. Quote 28. To learn listening, too, is the common concern of student and teacher. Heidegger underlines the importance of listening as a foundational part of learning to think. Both students and teachers must engage in this practice, as it allows for an openness to what calls for thought. True listening creates the conditions for thoughtful dialogue and reflection, essential for the journey of learning to think. Quote 29. The essence of technology is not anything human. The essence of technology lies in what, from the beginning and before all else, gives food for thought. Heidegger stresses that technology's essence is not a human construct, but something that predates and transcends human activity. To understand technology, one must think about what has always been thought-provoking, hinting at a fundamental force or truth underlying technological development. Quote 30. To reflect on thinking and to trace thinking in thought are perhaps not altogether the same. Heidegger distinguishes between merely reflecting on thinking as an object and engaging with thinking as a dynamic process. While reflection can involve observing and analyzing thinking, tracing thinking means actively participating in the flow of thought. This differentiation suggests that true thinking requires immersion in the act itself. Quote 31. Thinking has this enigmatic property, that it itself is brought to its own light, though only if and only as long as it is thinking, and keeps clear of persisting in ratiocination about ratio. Heidegger suggests that thinking illuminates itself only when it actively engages with thought. It cannot be confined to mere logical analysis, ratiocination, about rationality itself. True thinking requires an ongoing process of engagement with what is most thought-provoking rather than self-reflective theorizing. Quote 32. The devastation of the earth can easily go hand in hand with a guaranteed supreme living standard for man, and just as easily with the organized establishment of a uniform state of happiness for all men. This quote points to the paradox of modernity, where apparent progress and material well-being coexist with a deeper sense of devastation. Heidegger indicates that the pursuit of comfort and uniform happiness can obscure the underlying wasteland of thoughtlessness, suggesting that material success does not equate to true fulfillment or understanding. Quote 33. What is most thought-provoking is that we are still not thinking. Heidegger repeats this central assertion to emphasize the absence of true thinking in contemporary society. It implies that, despite the increasing complexity and challenges of modern life, people have not yet genuinely engaged with what demands thoughtful consideration. This statement serves as a call to action for deeper reflection and awareness. Quote 34. Joyful things, too, and beautiful and mysterious and gracious things give us food for thought. Heidegger expands the scope of what is thought-provoking beyond the negative or worrying aspects of life. He suggests that elements of joy, beauty, and grace also call for contemplation and can be just as, if not more, thought-provoking. This points to a richer understanding of thinking that involves embracing the full spectrum of human experience. Quote 35. The one-sided view, which nowhere pays attention any longer to the essence of things, has puffed itself up into an all-sidedness which in turn is masked so as to look harmless and natural. This statement critiques the modern tendency to adopt a superficial, one-sided perspective that presents itself as comprehensive. Heidegger warns that this illusion of all-sidedness hides the essential nature of things, leading to a uniformity of thought that lacks true depth and engagement with the fundamental aspects of existence. Quote 36. This still not contains a peculiar reference to something still to come, of which we absolutely do not know whether it will come to us. Heidegger describes the phrase still not thinking as implying a future possibility. It suggests that the potential for true thinking exists, but it is uncertain and beyond our control. This uncertainty creates an openness toward what might come, emphasizing the need to remain receptive to the arrival of genuine thought. Quote 37. Most thought-provoking is not only what gives most food for thought, in the sense that it makes the greatest demands on our thinking. Most thought-provoking is what inherently gathers and keeps within itself the greatest riches of what is thought-worthy and memorable. Heidegger defines what is most thought-provoking as not merely that which challenges our thinking, but also as what contains profound richness and significance. This means that what truly calls for thought is that which has an enduring intrinsic worth that draws our attention and reflection. Quote 38. The key in which our assertion is tuned cannot, then, be determined simply like that of an ordinary statement. Heidegger suggests that the assertion that we are still not thinking cannot be easily categorized as optimistic, pessimistic, or indifferent. Its nature is complex and resists simple classification, reflecting the depth and ambiguity inherent in the act of thinking itself. This indicates that understanding thinking requires moving beyond conventional modes of evaluation. Quote 39. The way or how of the saying is the tone from which and to which what is said is attuned. Heidegger emphasizes that the way something is said, its tone, is not merely a manner of expression, but an integral part of the content itself. The tone shapes how the message resonates and influences what is being communicated, suggesting that the form of expression is deeply connected to the substance of thought. Quote 40. An idea is called correct when it conforms to its object. Such correctness in the forming of an idea has long since been equated with truth. That is, we determine the nature of truth by the conformity of the idea. This quote addresses the traditional view of truth as correctness, where an idea is considered true if it aligns with the reality of the object it represents. Heidegger hints at the limitations of this perspective, suggesting that the nature of truth might be more complex than mere correspondence between idea and object. Quote 41. We stand outside of science. Instead, we stand before a tree in bloom, for example, and the tree stands before us. The tree faces us. The tree and we meet one another, as the tree stands there, and we stand face to face with it. Heidegger describes an encounter with a tree to illustrate a more direct, immediate experience that goes beyond scientific observation or representation. This face-to-face meeting with the tree signifies an authentic way of being in the world, where the presence of the tree and our perception of it are intertwined. Quote 42. A curious, indeed unearthly thing that we must first leap onto the soil on which we really stand. Heidegger points out the strangeness of needing to consciously return to the fundamental reality we already inhabit. This leap signifies a departure from abstract thinking or scientific detachment, urging a reconnection with the grounding essence of our existence and experience. Quote 43. Whence do the sciences, which necessarily are always in the dark about the origin of their own nature, derive the authority to pronounce such verdicts? Heidegger questions the authority of science to define reality, suggesting that science, while powerful in its scope, lacks a true understanding of its own origins and limits. This quote challenges the assumption that scientific knowledge is the ultimate arbiter of truth, highlighting the need to explore other modes of understanding. Quote 44. The real nature of thought might reveal itself to us if we remain underway. We are underway. Heidegger emphasizes the idea that thinking is not a destination but an ongoing journey. By being underway, we are constantly exploring and moving toward the essence of thought. This journey requires openness and a willingness to question established notions, rather than seeking fixed answers. Nietzsche's quote 45. Words are never a mere statement about the modern age, which could be freely taken out of Nietzsche's exposition. Still less are they an expression of Nietzsche's inner experiences. Heidegger clarifies that Nietzsche's words, such as "the wasteland grows," should not be reduced to simple commentary on contemporary society or personal reflections. Instead, they are profound expressions that trace and clear a path of thought, reflecting a deeper engagement with the nature of existence and its challenges. Quote 46. We must guard against the blind urge to snatch at a quick answer in the form of a formula. We must stay with the question. Heidegger stresses the importance of resisting the temptation to seek easy, definitive answers when it comes to understanding complex concepts like thinking. Instead, he encourages us to remain with the question, implying that the process of inquiry itself holds more value than hastily reaching a conclusion. Quote 47. The thinker needs one thought only, and for the thinker the difficulty is to hold fast to this one only thought as the one and only thing that he must think, to think this one as the same, and to tell of this same in the fitting manner. Heidegger points out that a true thinker doesn't require a multitude of ideas, but rather focuses on a singular, profound thought. The challenge lies in maintaining and exploring this central idea deeply, and conveying it in a way that does justice to its essence. This notion underscores the depth and intensity required in philosophical thinking. Quote 48. The threat is that perhaps this most thoughtful thought will today, and still more tomorrow, become suddenly no more than a platitude, and as platitudes spread and circulate. Here, Heidegger expresses concern that profound thoughts risk becoming trivialized over time, turning into mere clichés. The depth of thought can be lost as ideas circulate and become popularized, transforming into shallow repetitions rather than maintaining their original significance. Quote 49. A dialogue can answer, then, to Nietzsche's thought, which is a transition. A dialogue whose own way is preparing a transition. Heidegger indicates that engaging with Nietzsche's thought requires an ongoing dialogue, a conversation that is itself in transition. This means that understanding Nietzsche is not about reaching a final conclusion, but rather participating in an evolving process of thinking, one that continually moves between different perspectives. Quote 50. To lose here means to make ourselves truly free of that which Nietzsche's thinking has thought. Heidegger suggests that freeing oneself from Nietzsche's thought doesn't mean forgetting or dismissing it, but rather understanding it so deeply that one can move beyond it. To lose Nietzsche's thought is to engage with it fully and then transcend it, integrating its essence while opening up to new possibilities in thinking. Quote 51. Part of what is thought-provoking is that Nietzsche's thought has still not been found. Heidegger implies that Nietzsche's ideas remain largely unexplored and misunderstood. Despite extensive discussion and literature about Nietzsche, the core of his thought has not yet been grasped or realized. This points to the challenge of truly understanding profound philosophical insights. Quote 52. What a thinker has thought can be mastered only if we refer everything in his thought that is still unthought back to its originary truth. Heidegger argues that to truly engage with a thinker's ideas, one must explore the aspects that have not been fully considered or understood. This process involves tracing these ideas back to their original essence, which requires a deeper level of contemplation beyond mere interpretation or refutation. Nietzsche, quote 53, declares that man's essential nature is not yet determined. It has neither been found nor been secured. Heidegger explains Nietzsche's view that humanity has not yet realized its true nature. According to Nietzsche, the current definition of humans as rational beings is incomplete. Humans are still evolving, and their essence remains undefined, suggesting that a transformation is necessary for humanity to reach its full potential. Quote 54. Man is the as yet undetermined animal. The rational animal has not yet been brought into its full nature. This quote reinforces the idea that humans, defined by their rationality, have not yet achieved their full essence. Despite being capable of reason, humans have not embraced or understood the depth of their nature. This gap in self-realization marks the need for a transition toward a higher state of being. Quote 55. The Superman is the man who first leads the essential nature of existing man over into its truth, and so assumes that truth. Heidegger interprets Nietzsche's concept of the Superman as the individual who fully realizes and embodies the true nature of humanity. This figure transcends the limitations of the last man, revealing a higher way of being that aligns with the profound truth of existence. Quote 56. The wasteland grows. Woe to him who hides wastelands within. This quote suggests that the inner barrenness of the human soul mirrors the external devastation in the world. The warning is directed at those who ignore their inner emptiness, implying that neglecting one's deeper nature leads to a collective decline in thought and values. Quote 57. The last man lives longest. We have invented happiness. Say, the last men, and they blink. Heidegger references Nietzsche's critique of the last man, a figure who embodies complacency and a shallow existence. This man values comfort and superficial happiness over striving for deeper meaning. The blinking represents a passive acceptance of this hollow life, indicating the decay of true human potential. Quote 58. Today's man lags behind, not just here and there. No, in everything he is, in all his ways, he lags curiously behind that which is and has long been. Heidegger echoes Nietzsche's concern that modern humanity is not prepared to confront the challenges of the present and future. Despite technological advances, humans are not evolving in their essential nature, and are falling behind in their capacity to think deeply and assume responsibility for the world. Quote 59. The Superman is poorer, simpler, tenderer and tougher, quieter and more self-sacrificing and slower of decision, and more economical of speech. Heidegger describes Nietzsche's concept of the Superman, highlighting qualities that differ from the common perception of a dominant or overpowering figure. The Superman embodies a refined and balanced character, marked by restraint, thoughtfulness, and a willingness to sacrifice. This portrayal contrasts with the image of unbridled power and suggests a deeper transformation of human nature. Quote 60. To use an image, to a fish, the depths and expanses of its waters, the currents and quiet pools, warm and cold layers are the element of its multiple mobility. Heidegger uses this metaphor to explain that true thinking, like a fish in its natural element, thrives in the complexity of multiple meanings and interpretations. Thinking must move freely through its diverse depths, avoiding rigid, simplistic perspectives. This analogy implies that restricting thought to a single viewpoint is akin to dragging the fish onto dry land, where it cannot survive. Quote 61. What he really thought became known only through the largely inadequate posthumous publications. Heidegger notes that Nietzsche's true thoughts were not fully conveyed in his published works, which were often polemical and reactive. The more profound aspects of Nietzsche's philosophy surfaced only in his posthumous writings, which are difficult to grasp in their entirety. This acknowledgement underscores the challenge of understanding Nietzsche's ideas in their true depth. Quote 62. The Superman goes beyond man such as he is till now, and thus goes away from him. This statement highlights the transformative nature of the Superman, as envisioned by Nietzsche. The Superman represents a break from the current state of humanity, moving beyond the limitations of conventional human existence. This transition indicates a departure from old ways of being and thinking toward a new, elevated state of existence. Quote 63. It is the stillest words that bring on the storm. Thoughts that come on doves' feet guide the world. Heidegger references Nietzsche to emphasize that the most profound and transformative ideas often emerge quietly, without force or noise. True thoughts do not need to be shouted to exert their influence. Their subtlety and depth have the power to shape the world. This idea contrasts with the loud, superficial proclamations often seen in public discourse. Quote 64. The unthought is the greatest gift that thinking can bestow. Heidegger suggests that the value of a thinker's work lies not only in what is explicitly stated, but also in what remains unspoken or unexplored. This unthought element offers a depth that can provoke further reflection and discovery, presenting an opportunity for thinkers to engage with the mystery and richness of philosophical inquiry. Quote 65. The last man lives longest. This quote reflects Nietzsche's view that the last man, who represents a complacent and unaspiring human existence, will endure for an extended period. This endurance is due to the last man's nature, which seeks comfort and avoids the challenges of deep thinking or the pursuit of higher ideals. The quote warns of a stagnant state where the superficial dominates. Quote 66. Every philosophical, that is, thoughtful doctrine of man's essential nature is in itself alone a doctrine of the being of beings. Heidegger conveys that any philosophical exploration of human nature is inherently connected to an inquiry into the nature of being itself. This interrelation means that understanding humanity requires engaging with the fundamental questions of existence. It underlines the inseparability of the human condition from the larger question of being. Quote 67. Sound common sense is always trimmed to fit a certain conception of what is and ought to be and may be. Heidegger critiques sound common sense as being limited by pre-existing notions and conventions. This kind of thinking fails to remain open to the full reality of what exists, restricting its understanding to fit within comfortable, familiar frameworks. As a result, it overlooks the deeper aspects of truth that go beyond everyday perceptions. Quote 68. The thinker's language tells what is. Heidegger asserts that the language used by philosophers is not merely an expression of their individual views. Rather, it reveals the essence of reality. True philosophical language discloses the nature of being, requiring a careful and attentive engagement to grasp its profound significance. Quote 69. If we want to go to the encounter of a thinker's thought, we must magnify still further what is great in him. This quote emphasizes the need to approach philosophical texts with an attitude of respect and openness. To truly understand a thinker's ideas, one must amplify and explore the profound aspects of their work, rather than reducing or dismissing them. This approach allows for a deeper engagement with the thinker's insights and the unthought within their philosophy. Quote 70. The spirit of revenge, my friends, has so far been the subject of man's best reflection, and wherever there was suffering, their punishment was also wanted. Heidegger presents Nietzsche's view that human thinking has been largely driven by a desire for revenge, a pursuit that manifests in various forms of judgment and punishment. This fixation on revenge indicates a mindset that traps humanity in a cycle of reactivity, preventing it from evolving beyond its current state. Quote 71. We shall see to it from every angle, with the aid of our sociology, psychology, and psychotherapy, and by some other means besides, that all men are soon placed in identical conditions of identical happiness in the identical way, and that the identity of the welfare of all men is secured. Heidegger critiques modern efforts to create a uniform state of happiness, arguing that these attempts rely on standardized ways of thinking and being. This pursuit of uniformity overlooks the complexity of human existence and promotes a superficial form of welfare that may, in fact, suppress deeper aspects of human nature. Quote 72. The last man must move in a realm of ideas which blink at everything and can do nothing else but blink. Heidegger explains that the last man, a symbol of modern humanity's complacency, operates within a superficial mode of thinking. This blinking represents a way of forming ideas that only skims the surface of reality, failing to engage with its depth and significance. It results in a shallow existence that lacks true understanding. Quote 73. Could it be that this manner of forming ideas at bottom sets upon everything it sets before itself in order to depose and decompose it? Heidegger questions whether the modern way of thinking inherently seeks to break down and control whatever it encounters. This mode of thought does not allow beings to be as they are. Instead, it pursues them aggressively, attempting to categorize and dominate them. This approach indicates a fundamental opposition to the essence of what truly is. Quote 74. For that man be delivered from revenge. That is the bridge to the highest hope for me, and a rainbow after long storms. Here, Heidegger highlights Nietzsche's belief that overcoming the desire for revenge is crucial for humanity's progression. The bridge signifies a passage to a higher state of being, where one transcends reactive tendencies and embraces a new way of existing. This deliverance offers the promise of a transformed humanity. Quote 75. The pain that rises from the rift of that which is, does not yet reach man in his essence. Heidegger suggests that, although suffering and distress are pervasive, they do not penetrate deeply enough to awaken humanity to its true nature. This indicates a disconnection between humans and the fundamental essence of existence, where suffering fails to provoke a necessary shift in how people understand and engage with reality. Quote 76. The space of freedom from revenge is prior to all pacifism, and equally to all power politics. Heidegger describes Nietzsche's idea of the Superman's essential nature, which resides in a realm beyond revenge. This freedom transcends both pacifism and power struggles, indicating a profound state of being where the individual is not bound by reactive emotions. It points toward a new way of thinking and existing that is not dominated by the cycles of conflict inherent in human nature. Quote 77. Ethics and psychology are grounded in metaphysics. Heidegger emphasizes that Nietzsche's thoughts on human behavior, such as revenge, are not merely matters of ethics or psychology. Instead, they are rooted in metaphysical concerns, questions about the nature of reality and existence. Understanding human nature requires examining how it is fundamentally related to the essence of being. Quote 78. The torn condition keeps the way open into metaphysics. Heidegger indicates that the fragmented nature of human consciousness, or the experience of being torn, creates a space for engaging with metaphysical questions. This inner rift allows individuals to encounter deeper truths, suggesting that the discomfort of a divided consciousness is necessary for meaningful philosophical inquiry. Quote 79. To modern metaphysics, the being of beings appears as will. Heidegger notes that in modern philosophy, the essence of all beings is conceived as will. This perspective shapes how reality is understood and approached, highlighting that the nature of existence is fundamentally linked to an active, willing force. Nietzsche's idea of the will to power reflects this metaphysical orientation. Quote 80. Revenge is the will's revulsion against time, and it was. Heidegger presents Nietzsche's notion that revenge is an expression of the will's opposition to the passage of time. The will seeks to overcome the past, which is fixed and unchangeable, but in doing so, it becomes trapped in a cycle of resentment. This desire to negate the "it was" underscores the conflict between human will and the reality of temporal existence. Quote 81. The idea of what is in itself metaphysical. Heidegger argues that any attempt to define what is inherently involves metaphysical thinking. By relating to what exists, humans go beyond the mere appearance of things and engage with their underlying essence. This engagement with being is at the core of philosophical thought, illustrating that thinking is always connected to metaphysical concerns. Quote 82. It is high time, finally, to think through this nature of time and its origin, so that we may reach the point where it becomes clear that all metaphysics leaves something essential unthought, its own ground and foundation. Heidegger calls for a deep exploration of the concept of time, asserting that traditional metaphysical thought has neglected its own basis. By examining the origins of our understanding of time, we might uncover fundamental aspects of existence that metaphysics has failed to address. This reflection suggests that true thinking requires questioning the very foundations of what we consider to be reality. Quote 83. Since in all metaphysics from the beginning of Western thought, being means being present. Being, if it is to be thought in the highest instance, must be thought as pure presence, that is, as the presence that persists, the abiding present. Heidegger explains how Western metaphysics has historically equated being with presence. This identification has led to a conception of existence that prioritizes what is currently present, neglecting the complexities of time, such as the past and future. The emphasis on presence shapes the entire framework of metaphysical inquiry. Quote 84. Revenge is the will's revulsion against time. This now means revenge is the will's revulsion against the passing away, and what has passed away, against time and its it was. Heidegger delves into Nietzsche's idea that revenge stems from the will's refusal to accept the irreversible nature of time. The will struggles against the reality that what has happened is fixed in the past, leading to a state of constant opposition to the flow of time. This fixation on the it was signifies a deeper metaphysical tension within the human condition. Quote 85. Deliverance from revenge is the will's liberation from what is revolting to it, so that the will can at last be will. Heidegger describes the concept of deliverance as freeing the will from its opposition to the past. This liberation enables the will to fully embrace its own nature, rather than being bound by resentment. It represents a transformation in how the will engages with time, allowing it to move beyond the constraints of revenge and affirm its true essence. Quote 86. The Superman surpasses man, as he is, by entering into the relatedness to being. Being which, as the will of the eternal recurrence of the same, eternally wills itself and nothing else. Heidegger outlines Nietzsche's notion of the Superman, an individual who transcends ordinary human existence by embracing the eternal recurrence. This acceptance signifies a radical shift in how one relates to being, embodying a will that constantly affirms itself and the endless cycle of existence. The Superman is thus the pinnacle of human evolution in Nietzsche's thought. Quote 87. The thought of the eternal recurrence of the same is Nietzsche's weightiest thought in a twofold sense. It is the most strenuous to think, and it has the greatest weight. Heidegger emphasizes the profound difficulty of grasping the idea of eternal recurrence. This thought challenges the will to affirm all aspects of existence, past, present, and future, without resentment. Its weight lies in the demand it places on thought to reconcile with the endless repetition of existence, confronting the very core of human struggle with time. Quote 88. What is called thinking? The question sounds definite. It seems unequivocal, but even a slight reflection shows it to have more than one meaning. Heidegger opens with the observation that the question, what is called thinking, appears straightforward, yet quickly reveals its complexity. He suggests that thinking is not a singular or easily definable activity. The ambiguity of this question points to the multifaceted nature of thought, indicating that any exploration of thinking must embrace its various interpretations. Quote 89. The question, what is called thinking, asks finally, in the fourth place, what is it that calls us, as it were, commands us to think? What is it that calls us into thinking? Heidegger proposes that the most profound aspect of thinking involves what calls, or commands, us to engage in thought. This call suggests that thinking is not simply a voluntary action, but a response to something greater that invites or compels us to think. It hints at an external or intrinsic force that necessitates the act of contemplation. Quote 90. We ourselves are, in the strict sense of the word, put in question by the question. This quote emphasizes that when we inquire about what calls us to think, we simultaneously question our own nature. Heidegger implies that to truly explore what thinking is, we must examine how it relates to our being. The question about thinking, therefore, is a self-reflective one that challenges our understanding of who we are. Quote 91. Calling is not originally to name, but the other way around. Naming is a kind of calling, in the original sense of demanding and commending. Heidegger explores the concept of calling as something that goes beyond merely naming. He suggests that calling involves an invitation or a command that brings something into presence. Naming, then, is a subset of calling, indicating that the act of thinking is intertwined with a deeper process of engagement with reality. Quote 92. What calls on us to think demands for itself that it be tended, cared for, husbanded in its own essential nature by thought. Heidegger suggests that the call to think is not arbitrary. It stems from something that inherently requires thoughtful consideration. This calling demands our care and attention, urging us to nurture and explore it fully through our thinking. It implies that true thinking involves a responsibility toward what calls us. Quote 93. The question, what is called thinking, asks for what wants to be thought about in the preeminent sense. It does not just give us something to think about, nor only itself, but it first gives thought and thinking to us. It entrusts thought to us as our essential destiny. Heidegger describes the question of thinking as more than just an inquiry into the nature of thought. It is an invitation to engage with that which entrusts thought to us as part of our fundamental nature. This quote indicates that thinking is not just an intellectual activity, but is intrinsically linked to our very being and destiny. Quote 94. What is most thought-provoking gives food for thought in the original sense that it gives us over, delivers us to thought. Heidegger suggests that what truly provokes thought does more than just provide material for contemplation. It essentially places us into a state of thinking. This process of being delivered to thought is an intrinsic part of our nature. It means that thinking is not simply an activity we perform, but something we are given to through our engagement with what is most thought-provoking. Quote 95. Whether we are in any given case capable of thinking, that is, whether we accomplish it in the fitting manner, depends on whether we are inclined to think, whether, that is, we will let ourselves become involved with the nature of thinking. Heidegger points out that the capacity to think is not guaranteed. It depends on our willingness to immerse ourselves in the nature of thought. This involvement is rare and not easily achieved, suggesting that thinking requires a certain disposition and openness to fully engage with its demands. It's not merely a question of intellectual ability, but of inclination and dedication. Quote 96. Thought and poesy never just use language to express themselves with its help. Rather, thought and poesy are in themselves the originary, the essential, and therefore also the final speech that language speaks through the mouth of man. Here, Heidegger argues that thinking and poetry are not merely acts of using language. They are the fundamental expressions of language itself. They reveal the essential nature of language, suggesting that when we think or create poetry, we engage in the purest form of linguistic expression. This understanding elevates both thought and poetry beyond mere tools for communication. Quote 97. Words are not terms, and thus are not like buckets and kegs, from which we scoop a content that is there. Words are wellsprings that are found and dug up in the telling, wellsprings that must be found and dug up again and again. Heidegger emphasizes that words are not static containers of meaning. Instead, they are sources that must be continually revisited and explored to reveal their depth. This ongoing process of discovery in language suggests that true understanding requires an active engagement with words rather than relying on fixed definitions. Quote 98. The call to think determines what the word to think calls for. Yet the call which commends our nature to thought is not a constraining force. The call sets our nature free. Heidegger explains that the call to think defines what thinking truly entails. This call, however, does not limit or constrain us. Rather, it liberates our nature, allowing us to fully engage with thought. It indicates that thinking is a process of becoming free, of aligning ourselves with the deeper essence of our existence. Quote 99. Freedom, therefore, is never something merely human, nor merely divine. Still less is freedom the mere reflection of their belonging together. Heidegger suggests that freedom transcends conventional human or divine attributes. It is not simply a product of human will or divine intervention. Instead, freedom is something that arises from the very nature of thinking itself. It hints at a form of freedom that is connected to a more profound and fundamental engagement with existence. Quote 100. Thought is in need of memory, the gathering of thought. Heidegger suggests that memory is not merely the recall of past events, but an essential aspect of thinking itself. Memory serves as a gathering point where thoughts come together and reside. This gathering allows thought to concentrate and focus, indicating that true thinking requires a deeper, more sustained engagement with what is being remembered and contemplated. Quote 101. The thane, that which is thought, the thought, implies the thanks. In this quote, Heidegger traces the etymology of the word thought back to the Old English term thane, which implies an act of thanksgiving. Thinking, in its essence, is intertwined with gratitude. This relationship suggests that to think genuinely is also to give thanks, as thinking involves an acknowledgement and appreciation of what is given to us to contemplate. Quote 102. Original thinking is the thanks owed for being. Heidegger describes the act of thinking as a form of original gratitude directed towards existence itself. This kind of thanks is not a mere social gesture, but a fundamental recognition of the gift of being. To think, then, is to participate in a form of thanksgiving that acknowledges our connection to the world and the depth of our existence. Quote 103. Pure thanks is rather that we simply think what is really and solely given, what is there to be thought. Here, Heidegger emphasizes that the highest form of gratitude is the act of thinking itself. By contemplating what is genuinely given to us, we express our thanks. This kind of thinking is not about repaying or reciprocating. It is about dwelling in the essence of what calls us to thought, allowing it to reveal itself in its fullness. Quote 104. The gathering of thinking back into what must be thought is what we call the memory. Heidegger defines memory as the act of gathering our thinking around what is essential and demands our contemplation. Memory, in this sense, is not limited to recalling past events. It is a concentrated focus on what is present and must be thought through. It involves a steadfast devotion to what calls for reflection, keeping it alive in our minds. Quote 105. If thinking could dispose of that which ever and again gives food for thought, dispose it into its own nature. Such thinking would be the highest thanks mortals can give. Heidegger posits that if thinking could fully grasp and place into its nature what consistently provokes thought, it would represent the ultimate act of gratitude. This form of thinking would not attempt to dominate or control what it considers. Rather, it would offer the most profound thanks by allowing the thought-provoking to exist in its true state. This suggests a form of thinking that respects and preserves the integrity of what is being contemplated. Quote 106. Memory initially signifies man's inner disposition and devotion. Heidegger highlights that memory, in its original sense, goes beyond mere recollection. It refers to the inner nature and devotion of a human being. This notion of memory encompasses the entirety of human essence, not just the ability to recall past events. It suggests a deep connection between memory, thought, and the soul's disposition. Quote 107. The gathering of recalling thought is not based on a human capacity, such as the capacity to remember and retain. Heidegger argues that true recalling thought, or memory, does not simply arise from human faculties like memory or retention. Instead, it originates from a deeper source that holds and keeps all that remains to be thought. This suggests that memory involves a kind of gathering that transcends human capabilities, indicating a more fundamental essence at play. Quote 108. Memory, as the human recall of what must be thought about consists in the keeping of what is most thought-provoking. Here, Heidegger describes memory as the act of keeping what is most essential and thought-provoking. This form of memory is not merely storing information. It involves safeguarding and holding within itself the essence of what demands contemplation. The keeping is an active, ongoing process that preserves the depth of thought. Quote 109. The origin keeps itself concealed in the beginning. This quote indicates that the true origin of thought and memory remains hidden and veiled within their beginnings. Heidegger suggests that what we perceive as the starting point is merely a cover for something more profound. This concealment is intrinsic to the nature of thought, which contains layers of meaning beyond what is immediately apparent. Quote 110. Language is not a tool. Language is language. Heidegger insists that language cannot be reduced to a mere instrument of communication. It is not something that can be manipulated or used at will. Instead, language is a fundamental aspect of human existence and thought. This statement underscores the idea that language holds its own essence, guiding and shaping the way humans think and experience the world. Quote 111. The basic character of thinking is constituted by propositions. Heidegger addresses the traditional understanding of thinking, which is often characterized by logical propositions and judgments. This conventional approach emphasizes that thinking involves formulating statements and logical structures. However, Heidegger contrasts this with another mode of thinking rooted in memory, devotion, and thanks, suggesting a deeper, more primordial nature of thought. Quote 112. Thinking receives its essential character to this day from what in Greek is called logos. Heidegger points out that Western thinking has been fundamentally shaped by the Greek concept of logos. This shaping influences how thought is understood, emphasizing reason, discourse, and the structuring of ideas. Heidegger questions why this definition of thinking has persisted, hinting at the possibility of other modes of thought that are not bound by this Greek conception. Quote 113. The call by which thinking has been called, and is still being called, into its long habituated nature. Here, Heidegger suggests that thinking is not something we simply do. It is a response to a call that draws us into a particular mode of thought. This call has historically directed thinking toward the form characterized by propositions and judgments, raising the question of why this specific path was taken and whether there are other ways of engaging in thought. Quote 114. The call as destiny is so far from being incomprehensible and alien to thinking that, on the contrary, it always is precisely what must be thought. Heidegger argues that the call that shapes thinking is not some foreign or unknowable force. Instead, it is what fundamentally needs to be contemplated. This suggests that our very nature and destiny are intertwined with this call, and understanding it is essential for grasping the essence of thought itself. Quote 115. The destiny of our fateful historic Western nature shows itself in the fact that our sojourn in this world rests upon thinking. Heidegger reflects on the idea that the destiny of Western civilization has been founded on thinking as its way of dwelling in the world. Even when Western thought is influenced by elements like faith, it is still grounded in a mode of thinking. This highlights the deep-rooted connection between the act of thinking and the way Western culture experiences existence. Quote 116. The way of thinking cannot be traced from somewhere to somewhere like a well-worn rut, nor does it at all exist as such in any place. Heidegger emphasizes that thinking is not a straightforward path with a clear beginning and end. It is not a predetermined route, but rather an ongoing process that must be walked, constantly forming and reshaping itself. This dynamic nature of thinking means that it cannot be fully captured or defined by fixed concepts or historical narratives. Quote 117. If we stop only for one moment to say the phrase, "the tree is," saying it in terms of what the phrase says, we have already said "is" about the tree. Heidegger points out that simply acknowledging that something is involves more than describing its qualities or attributes. By stating that the tree is, we confront the fundamental nature of existence itself. This acknowledgement opens up questions about the essence of being, which is not found in the tree's characteristics, but in its very presence. Quote 118. The fact that we take the is too lightly is no proof that the is, and what it names, does not keep within it a weightiness that we can hardly ever weigh. Heidegger warns against dismissing the significance of the word is because it seems so commonplace. The ease with which we use this term does not diminish the depth and gravity it contains. He suggests that is might hold within it a profound truth about existence that we are often unaware of due to its everyday usage. Quote 119. The way of thinking is of such a kind that this crossroads can never be crossed by a once-for-all decision and choice of way, and the way can never be put behind as once-for-all behind us. This statement describes thinking as an ongoing process that continually encounters crossroads, or moments of decision and questioning. Heidegger implies that thinking is not about finding definitive answers, but about remaining open to the complexities and uncertainties of existence. The journey of thought is never completed or left behind. It constantly challenges us to explore new paths. Quote 120. The phrase being is holds the most completely fulfilled secret of all thinking in the first intimation of its statement. Here, Heidegger underscores the idea that the statement being is contains within it the essence of all philosophical inquiry. This simple phrase suggests a depth of meaning that hints at the origins and nature of existence. It invites us to explore the layers of thought and mystery contained within the concept of being. Quote 121. Every interpretation is a dialogue with the work and with the saying. Heidegger stresses that engaging with philosophical texts is not merely about extracting information. It is a conversation with the ideas and expressions within the work. This dialogue requires a dynamic interaction that involves moving beyond what is directly stated to engage with the deeper, unspoken elements. Understanding, therefore, arises from an active involvement with the text and its hidden meanings. Quote 122. The phrase being is keeps an infinite distance from empty platitudes. On the contrary, it holds the most completely fulfilled secret of all thinking. Heidegger insists that the simple assertion being is far from being a redundant or trivial statement. It holds within it a profound and enigmatic truth that is central to all forms of thinking. This phrase captures the essence of existence and opens up a depth of inquiry into the nature of being itself, challenging us to contemplate beyond surface-level understandings. Quote 123. Needful. The saying also, thinking too, being, to be. Heidegger presents this arrangement to highlight the importance of paratactic structure in language. In this context, the statement points to the interrelation of speaking, thinking, and being. By aligning these words in a paratactic manner, Heidegger emphasizes that the connection between saying, thinking, and being exists without the need for syntactic order. This arrangement suggests that true thought lies in the space where words coexist side by side, hinting at a deeper unity among them. Quote 124. Man is the being who has his being by pointing to what is, and that particular beings manifest themselves as such, by such pointing. This quote implies that human existence is defined by the act of pointing toward things, by engaging with what exists. In doing so, beings are revealed and brought into the realm of thought. Human nature, therefore, is deeply connected to the world through this pointing, indicating that existence is a continuous interplay between humans and the beings they encounter. Quote 125. To use something is to let it enter into its essential nature, to keep it safe in its essence. Heidegger redefines the concept of use as a way of allowing something to fully be what it is. Proper use is not about exploiting or consuming, but about fostering a relationship in which the thing is preserved in its true nature. This idea of use involves care, respect, and an understanding of the essence of what is being used, suggesting that real use is about safeguarding rather than possession. Quote 126. Syntax is the study of sentence structure in the widest sense. Our ideas of the structure of languages are formed in terms of syntax. Here, Heidegger discusses syntax as the conventional way of understanding language, where words are ordered and connected through specific rules. This understanding shapes how we perceive and use language. However, Heidegger challenges us to consider other forms of word structure, such as paratactic arrangements, that reveal a different relationship between words and meaning. Quote 127. For under the firm measure the crude, too, is useful, that the pure may know itself. Heidegger draws from Hölderlin's poetry, suggesting that the crude, or the raw and unrefined, is essential in revealing the pure. Under the firm measure, which refers to being under the sky, or within the limits of existence, both the pure and the crude coexist. The crude does not oppose the pure, but rather allows the pure to manifest itself and recognize its own essence. Quote 128. The crude is not an addition to the pure, nor does the pure have need of the crude, but the crude must be there in order that the pure may become manifest to itself as the pure, and thus as that which is other. Heidegger explains that the crude is not simply an extra or a requirement for purity. Instead, its presence enables the pure to distinguish itself as something different. In the interplay between the crude and the pure comes to recognize its own essence. This relationship is not about affirming the crude, but about understanding its role in revealing what is truly pure. Quote 129. Using commends the used thing to its own nature and essence. In this using, there is concealed a command, a calling. Heidegger suggests that to use something is to respect and allow it to be in its true nature. This form of using is not an act of domination or consumption, but a manner of care that preserves the essence of what is used. In this careful use, there is an implicit calling, a command that aligns with the true nature of the thing being used. Quote 130. The saying speaks where there are no words, in the field between the words which the colons indicate. Heidegger emphasizes that true meaning is often found not in the words themselves, but in the spaces between them. The gaps, represented by colons, signify the unspoken elements that carry the essence of thought. This idea suggests that understanding requires listening to the silent interplay within language. Quote 131. To lay is to let lie before us. When we say something about something, we make it lie there before us, which means at the same time, we make it appear. Heidegger discusses the concept of laying as making something present or bringing it forth into appearance. By stating or expressing something, we bring it into view, allowing it to reveal itself. This process is central to thinking and speaking, as it involves allowing things to come forward and be recognized in their own right. Quote 132. Laying, thought as a letting lie in the widest sense, relates to what in the widest sense lies before us, and speaks without a sound. There is. Here, Heidegger conveys that laying something before us, allowing it to be, relates to the essence of what exists. This act of letting lie is a silent acknowledgement of presence, an affirmation of the simple fact that there is. This quiet acknowledgement underlies the foundation of thinking and speaking. Quote 133. The conjunction of letting lie before us and taking to heart enters upon and into one another, in a give and take. Heidegger describes the relationship between perceiving, letting things lie before us, and internalizing, taking to heart, as a mutual process. This interaction is not a linear sequence, but a dynamic interplay where both aspects continually shape each other. It underscores that thinking is an ongoing, reciprocal activity, rather than a one-directional process. Quote 134. The essential nature of thinking cannot be adequately defined either by letting lie before us, taken alone, or by taking to heart, taken alone, or again by both together, taken as a conjunction. Heidegger argues that thinking cannot be fully captured by either the act of observing or internalizing separately, nor even by simply combining the two. True thinking encompasses a more profound nature that extends beyond these activities, pointing to the intricate and elusive quality of what it means to think. Quote 135. Thinking, then, is not a grasping, neither the grasp of what lies before us, nor an attack upon it. Here, Heidegger clarifies that genuine thinking does not involve seizing or manipulating the objects of thought. Instead, thinking is about engaging with what is present without imposing our own will or control over it. This perspective suggests that thinking is a respectful encounter with what lies before us, allowing it to reveal itself on its own terms. Quote 136. Thinking becomes the letting lie before us and taking to heart that is coordinated in a give and take. Heidegger defines thinking as the coordinated act of both allowing things to present themselves and embracing them in a reciprocal manner. This process is not about dominating or fixing what is thought, but about participating in a continuous exchange that respects the essence of what is being thought about. Quote 137. The Enlightenment obscures the essential origin of thinking. In general, it blocks every access to the thinking of the Greeks. Heidegger critiques the modern Enlightenment's approach to thought, claiming it distorts the original nature of thinking as conceived by the Greeks. By focusing on rationality and systematized knowledge, the Enlightenment has covered up the deeper, more fundamental characteristics of thinking, making it difficult to reconnect with the essence of early philosophical inquiry. Quote 138. Being can be, can it not, without there being men who take it to heart? Heidegger questions the necessity of human perception in relation to the concept of being. He suggests that being may exist independently of whether humans acknowledge it. This quote explores the idea that existence itself is not contingent upon human observation or understanding, implying that being possesses an inherent nature that transcends human consciousness. Quote 139. Letting things lie before us is necessary to supply us with what, lying thus before us, can be taken to heart. Heidegger argues that allowing things to present themselves as they are is the first step in truly understanding them. Only when we let things lie before us without imposing our interpretations can we genuinely grasp their essence. This taking to heart is a process of engaging with the reality of things in their natural state, fostering deeper contemplation. Quote 140. Being and to be are almost no more than empty sounds. Heidegger acknowledges that the terms being and to be have become so abstract and overused that they risk losing their meaning. Despite their fundamental importance in philosophical discourse, they can often seem vague or hollow, challenging us to seek a deeper understanding beyond mere words. Quote 141. The participle aeon, being, is not just one more participle among countless others. Enens, being, is the participle which gathers all other possible participles into itself. Heidegger elevates the concept of being above other forms or states of existence. He asserts that being is the central participle that encompasses all others, indicating that it is the foundational essence in which all things participate. This makes being the most crucial and comprehensive aspect of existence. Quote 142. Western European thinking, in keeping with the guiding question, to on, what is the particular being in its being, proceeds from beings to being. Heidegger describes the traditional path of Western philosophy, which starts with individual beings and then moves towards the concept of being. This journey represents a foundational method in Western thought, where understanding specific entities leads to the exploration of their underlying existence, or being. Quote 143. The duality of individual beings and being must first lie before us openly, be taken to heart, and there kept safely, before it can be conceived and dealt with in the sense of the participation of the one, a particular being, in the other, being. Heidegger stresses the importance of acknowledging the distinction between individual entities and the overarching concept of being. This duality must be recognized and internalized to truly explore how particular beings participate in the essence of being. Understanding this relationship is essential for deeper philosophical inquiry into the nature of existence. Quote 144. What is that which calls on us to think, by so disposing the conjunction of legein and noein that it relates to it? Heidegger suggests that true thinking is driven by a call that guides both language, legein, and thought, noein. This call is not just a directive, it is the essence that links speaking and thinking to something greater. To explore what it means to think, we must understand what this call demands of us, as it forms the foundation of our ability to relate thoughts and words to what truly matters. Quote 145. We are capable of thinking only if we try, first of all, to develop the question, what is called thinking, in its fourfold sense, and in the light of the decisive fourth question. Heidegger emphasizes that understanding what it means to think requires a multidimensional inquiry, not just a simple definition. The fourfold sense he refers to includes various aspects of thinking, culminating in the decisive question of what compels us to think in the first place. This comprehensive questioning is necessary to grasp the true nature of thinking. Quote 146. We are laboring to translate these words for one reason, and one reason only. Our sole question is, what is it that calls on us to think? Heidegger clarifies that his effort to translate ancient Greek concepts into modern understanding is driven by the need to uncover what compels human thought. By delving into the original meanings of words, he seeks to reveal the essence of what summons us to engage in genuine thinking. The translation process itself becomes a journey to explore the fundamental call to think. Quote 147. Being is present to us. Present and presence means what is with us, and that means to endure in the encounter. Heidegger explains that being is not an abstract concept, but something that is present and with us. This presence involves an enduring quality that allows beings to be encountered and understood. The idea of presence highlights the immediate and relational aspect of existence, urging us to engage with what is in a way that acknowledges its enduring nature. Quote 148. We must first of all respond to the nature of technology, and only afterward ask whether and how man might become its master. Heidegger warns that before attempting to control or master technology, we need to understand its essence. Technology is not merely a collection of tools, but a way of relating to the world. By exploring its true nature, we can better comprehend how it shapes our existence and how we might appropriately interact with it. Quote 149. The first service man can render is to give thought to the being of beings, and that is first of all to pay it heed. Heidegger stresses that our primary responsibility as human beings is to engage in thoughtful consideration of existence itself. To pay heed means to be attentive to the essence of being, allowing us to appreciate and understand it. This act of thoughtfulness is a form of service, as it opens us up to the truth of what is in the world around us. Quote 150. Presence itself is precisely the presence of what is present, and remains so even if we specifically stress its various traits. Heidegger describes presence as the essence of what is present. This idea holds true even when we examine different characteristics of presence. It signifies that presence is not just a trait or a quality, but the foundational state that allows things to appear and endure in their being. This underscores the importance of presence in understanding the nature of existence. Quote 151. Rest, in the presence of what is present, is a gathering. It gathers the rising to the coming to the fore, with the hidden suddenness of an ever-possible absenting into concealedness. Here, Heidegger suggests that rest within presence is an act of gathering. It is not a static or motionless state, but a moment where the rising and revealing of what is present comes together. This rest also carries the potential for absence, implying that the emergence of presence always involves the possibility of things returning to concealment. Quote 152. Wherever the thinking of the Greeks gives heed to the presence of what is present, the traits of presence which we mentioned find expression. Unconcealedness, the rising from unconcealedness, the entry into unconcealedness, the coming and the going away, the duration, the gathering, the radiance, the rest, the hidden suddenness of possible absenting. Heidegger illustrates how Greek thinkers approach the concept of presence. For them, presence embodied various traits such as unconcealedness, gathering, duration, and radiance. This indicates that the Greeks understood presence as a dynamic and multifaceted phenomenon, involving both the appearance and disappearance of beings. Quote 153. Subsequent European thinking, by asking the question, "What is being?" is set on the appointed road. The presence of what is present becomes for it even less problematical. Heidegger notes that European philosophical tradition, starting from the Greeks, took the question of being as a foundational inquiry. However, this focus eventually led to a diminishing awareness of the complexities of presence. As Western thought developed, it began to overlook the nuanced nature of presence in favor of other characteristics, like objectivity and reality. Quote 154. For it is the same thing to think and to be. However, in translating the saying we discussed before, we have learned to discern more precisely. Being means the presence of what is present, while thinking belongs in one single conjunction with speaking and signifies taking to heart. Heidegger revisits Parmenides' statement, emphasizing that thinking and being are intimately related. He clarifies that being refers to the presence of what is present, and thinking involves a thoughtful engagement with this presence. This relationship is not about identity, but about a profound connection, where thinking remains focused on what reveals itself in presence. Quote 155. Thinking is thinking only when it recalls in thought the it, that which this word indicates properly and truly, that is, unspoken, tacitly, and that is the duality of beings and being. Heidegger suggests that genuine thinking involves remembering and engaging with the fundamental it, which points to the duality between beings and being. This duality is not to be spoken directly, but rather held in thought as a quiet, reflective understanding. True thinking, therefore, is a process of recalling the mysterious and profound interplay between existence and individual beings. What is called thinking? By Martin Heidegger concludes by asserting that thinking is a rare and demanding task, requiring that we remain open to the mysteries of being. Heidegger emphasizes that thinking is not bound by scientific or calculative approaches, but is a pursuit deeply connected to our essence as human beings. Through this reflective process, we encounter being as something that both reveals and withdraws, prompting us to confront the unknowable with humility and attentiveness. Heidegger's reflections ultimately challenge us to recognize that the capacity for true thought is what makes us human, encouraging a contemplative life in which we continuously question and reflect upon our existence.
Curious to dive into the mind of Martin Heidegger? With StudyLab Pro's Book GPT, it's possible. Ask questions, explore themes, and discover the depths of what is called thinking in an entirely new way. Start your conversation now by clicking on our logo. And if you're hungry for more educational content, subscribe to our channel to keep discovering, learning, and growing. Want more than just videos? Click on our logo now to join us on our platform for multiple choice tests, in-depth content, and tools to help you ace your studies. Get started now.